I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast, thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear for details.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Dave, I have a small stack waddy for you.
Good,
if you fancy
good.
if you're brave enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on the idea that there's a new Pulp album coming out and they have a track on it called Farmer's Market, which I love the idea of this. I love the idea that they have a great fondness for very prosaic song titles.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of the forensic Jarvis Cocker perspective applied to these often quite mundane topics. And also very down to earth, of course, The Good Life. The Good Life sitcom, British sitcom of the 70s, explaining
the 80s,
for international
the 80s,
listeners.
surely. The 80s.
Oh, was it the 80s?
I don't know.
I think it was the 70s.
Oh, okay. Right.
But they also had very prosaic titles. So can you tell the Pulp song title?
Which
from
is
the
an episode from The Good Life
of The Good
or
Life?
a Pulp song title?
That's the one.
Okay.
All right. Here are 10.
Right.
The Thing in the Cellar.
Well, God. I'm going to say The Good Life.
It is The Good Life.
Wow.
Very good. Weeds.
Pulp.
Yes. The Guru of Surbiton.
The Good Life.
It is. 59 Lyndhurst Grove.
Pulp.
Yes, it is. Roadkill.
Pulp.
Yes. The Windbreak War.
Pulp.
Good Life.
Oh, okay.
The Trees.
Pulp.
It was. Maureen. That's a great title. Maureen.
Pulp.
Absolutely. The Last Posh Frock.
The Good Life.
Yes. And Dogs Are Everywhere.
Pulp.
Dave, it's virtually a 100%.
No,
it was too easy.
It wasn't too easy. It was really interesting, though. Now, some of them, some of my choices were down to the fact that I actually dimly remember the odd episode of The Good Life.
Yes.
The Last Posh Frock. I do remember that one. Felicity Kendall had her last posh frock and needed an excuse to wear it, you know.
And the Guru of Surbiton is a bit of a giveaway.
Well,
really,
because they were based in Surbiton, weren't they? You know,
and Windbreak Wars.
And also, there would be quite interesting socially. There would be no chance of there ever being a character in The Good Life called Maureen ever.
No, probably not.
It would never happen. Would never happen.
Whereas that's so Jarvis Cocker.
It's so Sheffield. You know, it's South Yorkshire.
There are Pulp songs called Answer Phone, Bar Italia, The Babysitter, that's good, yes. And Underwear.
Is it the one called Answer Phone? How's it spelt?
ANSA.
That's correct, you see. Because that was a brand name, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
You know, it's like, do you ever think, when I think about things like answer phones, when they appeared to be, you remember when the future first arrived and it seemed really enormously exciting. Now it's really dull. The answer phone was an extraordinary miracle. Do you remember, or did anybody in your family ever have a tease maid?
Yeah, you mean those little things where you set a timer and, oh God, yes. And there was a square kettle.
Think of it. I'll just explain this for the benefit of younger listeners. I remember my granddad got one, I think, when he retired.
Yeah.
And they were, if you can imagine this, listeners, a combination alarm clock and a tea-making machinery. And the promise of the thing was that it would wake you at whatever your appointed time was, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and then would boil a kettle a few inches away from your head.
That's right. Yes?
And then
But we were woken by, do you know, I think we've still got one on the roof somewhere. So a little tiny square kettle with a tube going over into a square china teapot.
Oh my God.
Put your tea bag in, and when the water boiled and transferred over into the kettle, it tipped a counterbalance. Yeah, which because the kettle was then lighter and the teapot was heavier, so it tipped this little seesaw, and that clicked a button and woke you up. But by that time, you'd been woken by scalding steam pumping into your left ear.
It's blood curdling, the idea
It's incredible,
of it.
Isn't it?
I explained it to my kids nowadays. They go, "What?" And this was a thing that people looked forward to their retirement for having a tea made. You know what I mean? For not having to get up and
I won't have to get out of bed
and start the fire or whatever that generation very often did, you know. So anyway, sorry, how do we get there? Pulp to answer phone to Teasmaids. This is the standard logical sequence of events that we follow word in your ear, and which brings me naturally to the subject of space travel, Mark.
Space travel.
Did you
you follow this story?
No, I'm going to come to that in a second. I want to know, did you ever, as a nipper, you probably like me, hankered after being a cowboy or something like that? Did you ever dream of being an astronaut?
Not remotely.
No, it never entered my head.
It's incredibly unattractive.
Yes.
I mean, you're stuck in a little capsule with a load of people, probably bored to tears, without any form of entertainment. And then, well, in those days, actually, nobody had actually been out of the capsule and walked around on another planet. So what was the point? You went up, you came back down again.
What was the point? Jerry Seinfeld does this thing about the 1969, is it 69 moon landings or 68? I can't remember.
Yeah, 69, I think.
I think it is. He said, how American is that? To go to the moon and then get a car out and drive around a bit. That was really good.
That is perfect.
But no, it never held any appeal to me at all. And I could never kind of understand why musicians were always writing songs about it. Although the songs I like, Space Oddity and things like that, I like as much as anybody. But it never had any great appeal to my imagination. In fact, I go so far to say, I've thought about this a lot. Do you know what the best song about space is?
Go on.
Do you know Dan Hicks recorded a song quite late on in his career? No, not that late. What am I talking about? The 80s, whatever. And it was about being, kidnapped by Martians or something and taken away, And the title of the song was Hell, I'd Go.
Yes, I remember that.
It's a great song. If anybody, I heartily recommend anybody go and look it up on YouTube. Hell, I Go, and it contains, his rendition of what Martians would sound like. Very funny.
But those songs weren't. Most of those space songs weren't about the idea of being an astronaut. They're about just being in space and looking at the Earth and what the experience was like of looking back at the Earth, which was what interested me about that Katy Perry thing. Did you follow that?
I did. I deliberately didn't follow it, Mark, because I know when stories like this arrive, I think, well, Mark's in charge of following that story. I'm not going to. Well, he's going to explain it to me on the podcast.
I couldn't resist looking at it because Katy Perry and about, I think it's 5 or 6 other girls went on what they're calling a space mission. This is not a mission, Dave. They're not a crew. They describe themselves as the crew on a mission. This is a day trip, and they are simply passengers on a very, very expensive form of transport, But anyway, they went up on this thing. It was an 11-minute trip. Mm. They're in space, I think, for 4 minutes. And the thing that struck me was that what you want from that as a kind of viewer is you want them to describe what it looks like, what the experience is like. We've not been in space. What being in zero gravity is like. What the whole spectacle, looking back at the Earth, etc. And it just struck me that, and when the Apollo mission that we were talking about, I mean, admittedly, that's a different thing. That was a scientific mission, and these guys were prepared to make some kind of statement. But what they said was very memorable, wasn't it? One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Aldrin said, "Beautiful, beautiful, magnificent desolation," which is a really lovely little poetic line. And this gang get up there, and it's all they could talk about was themselves. It was all about personal growth and taking Instagrams. I'll give you an example. Katy Perry took a flower with her to space, and then declared, "I have so much love for my daughter Daisy." It was a Daisy. God. Yeah. So that really makes you feel included, doesn't it? She then sang Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World" while in space, while saying that her trip was for the benefit of the Earth. Yeah. And she said she prepared for the whole experience because she had a big knowledge of astrology. At one point, she gets out a little butterfly, which is actually the set list of her upcoming tour, which she's very keen to promote, and watches that float around in zero gravity. She said that space is finally going to be glam. We're going to put the ass in astronaut. She then described it as being the highest high in her life, but second only to being a mum. And then she said she couldn't recommend this experience more. I love that idea. This is an experience that, I mean, obviously her ticket would have been free, but I mean, the Virgin Galactic tickets for the same experience, which I think are the bottom of the range.
Right.
I don't think you get complimentary coffee and a champagne and some peanuts. I think it's just really bad. You bring your own sandwiches. Whatever. Those are, I think, £130,000. So let's assume it's £130,000 and it's 11 minutes long. That is £30,000 a minute. And she said, I couldn't recommend this experience more. The rest of the crew, filmmaker Kerry-Ann Flynn said it was the most incredible experience of my life. Lauren Sanchez, who's Jeff Bezos' fiance, said, I'm getting married and I had to come back. I don't really have words for this. I can't put into words, but I can't put it into words, but I looked out the window and we got to see the moon. And the rocket scientist, Aisha Bowe, said she'd never be the same again. I have learnt nothing, Dave, from any of that.
No.
The idea they go up there, they look out the window, they see the moon. You can see the moon from here.
That's true.
It's amazing.
That's true, isn't it?
And then you got the commentator on the landing was Khloe Kardashian. Who said it's literally so hard to explain it right now. This is the commentator, right? There's a woman back there whose grandfather is 92, and they didn't even have transportation back then.
Yeah, damn nearly the Second World War at that point. I think there's quite sufficient transportation around. No, it's funny. It's interesting. It makes me think of the contrast between, documentaries and travel shows and things like this used to be presented by kind of experts. They were either experts in the field or they were experts at expressing themselves. And then something happened and they turned out to be all presented by celebrities. And with the celebrity, their presence is supposed to be quite sufficient in itself, And I noticed this. I can't remember what I was listening to watching some old TV documentary about, I don't know, somebody sailing around the world. And back in the 60s, they would use their powers of description to paint the picture or whatever. Then as soon as you get a famous person doing it, all the famous person says is, this is amazing.
It's just amazing.
This is just amazing.
And what's exciting is that they're saying it.
Absolutely.
They don't have to. They've already got your attention by being a famous person.
That's the point.
It's the expression I loathe most at the moment is no words. I have no words. People say that, meaning it's beyond description. It's not. It's beyond their capabilities of coming up with any words. They have no words because they can't think of anything to say.
Do you know who most often uses that expression is the person, the former footballer who's paid to be a summariser on football commentary. You think, well, that's damn ridiculous because why are you getting £1,000 for this or whatever you're getting? If you have no words, go away and get some, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought me up to date with Katy Perry's mission into space, and I feel now
it was very entertaining.
I know as much about it as I need to do. What's all this business about? You can also bring me up to date. Other things. I spent the weekend with my nose in a book. What's this going on? This strange goings on at the Albert Hall involving members of the.
Well, yes. Well, that's an interesting story, isn't it? I mean, how long has Zak Starkey been in the Who? I can't.
Well, I'll tell you, Mark, because I know this. More than 30.
More than 30 years.
More than 30 years, which is just extraordinary in
is.
itself. Anyway, carry on.
But no, Roger Daltrey said on stage when they were playing, he said, to sing that song, I do need to hear the key and I can't. All I've got is drums going boom, 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 and I can't sing to that. Sorry, guys. This is what he actually said on stage. And then Zak Starkey was apparently, I mean, I find this hard to believe because if someone's been in the group that long, there must be something beneath the surface that we don't know about. But to kind of announce that he had been dismissed from the group on social media seemed rather extraordinary. But anyway, that was the announcement that he was no longer in the band. And everybody immediately did this kind of pot kettle thing about the Who, famously the loudest group in Christendom, having the nerve to say, I'm sorry, but, I felt a lot of sympathy for Roger Daltrey. When you look at the clip of it, the drums are set up directly behind him. He's standing, literally, 6-10 feet in front of the drums. It's extraordinary.
And then they've got a kind of heat shield around the drums, haven't they, which is supposed to stop the sound from leaking to the vocal mic, says that something.
Yeah,
I do find, if you go back in the story of the Who, it's all about volume, isn't it? I mean, God knows that Who have made some brilliant records. Let's not denigrate that for a second, but volume has always been at the center of what they do. Their early records were loud. They were the first group to make a big deal of feedback and all that kind of stuff. And when, when Jim Marshall, the amplifier pioneer, started making these huge, great stacks, it was in response to Pete Townsend saying, we need bigger weapons. That's what he said. And the Who were the first band to to be able to play in front of huge audiences, often increasingly in the open air, and plays so loud that it was kind of impossible for the audience to talk to each other or have any.
I saw them and I've never heard anything so loud, I think before or since. Yeah. You couldn't speak to the person next to you.
But it goes to a point. I mean, these guys, they've been functionally deaf for years, haven't they?
Pete Townsend, terrible tinnitus.
Terrible tinnitus.
Well, so a lot of people, Phil Collins says the same, doesn't he? Yeah. Chris Martin of Pulp, Neil Young, Ozzy Osbourne, Lars Ulrich, Will.i.am, Dave Grohl, all these people.
And those are just the ones we know about.
Yeah, they're the ones who've said, they've admitted that they have got really terrible.
Well, it's that bit last year when David Remnick from New York was interviewing Paul McCartney.
Oh, yes.
And Paul McCartney leans over and he realizes the hearing aid has dropped out of his ear.
Yeah.
Obviously, the world's most discreet and expensive hearing aid is suddenly
he's popped back in again,
hoping
that the journalist didn't notice.
I mean, you and I
scribbling furiously.
You and I talk about this, because it is kind of amazing that neither of us, touch wood, have serious hearing problems.
No, we don't.
Because we know loads of people who do, don't we?
Yeah.
And not just people who, play in front of bands, It's not uncommon at all.
And we watched the Ramones with our heads about 6 feet from their bass bins.
Yes.
So, how does that happen?
But I mean, at no point in the Who's journey, which has involved things getting louder and louder and louder, has anybody said, I'll tell you what, let's just go slightly the other way, sure, because it just gets to a point where it's ridiculous. I remember reading about Ben Watt, Ben Watt, everything but the girl Ben Watt. And Ben Watt DJs as well as doing everything else. But he never DJs without ear defenders in. And you're thinking, what? How does that work as a form of entertainment? You got a room full of people who've paid to be exposed to noise that the performer or the generator of the noise is protected from, And I've said this before when Jonathan Richman and Modern Lovers when they came over here in '77, he said, "I'm not going to play loud anymore because it hurts the little children's ears," and we all laughed. Whereas nowadays, people go to rock festivals, they're taking a child with them. The first thing they think of, isn't it?
Defenders.
Ear Defenders, all this kind of stuff.
But when will people play softer? Because the problem is that a lot of it's to do with the idea of bludgeoning people into submission and making them feel like they've had a kind of physical experience. And also there's something very uniting, something very bonding about being bombarded by loud music. It brings you together, doesn't it?
I suppose so. But it kind of depends how long you do it for, really, doesn't it?
But if you play quiet, you run the risk of being aware as a performer that there are people who are disinterested, or they're talking, or they're distracted, or whatever, and that would be very different, which is the case for comedians, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing that makes rock musicians fundamentally different from any other form of entertainer, I think. If you're a comedian or you're an actor or, a classical musician, if somebody starts coughing in the fourth row, you're aware of it.
Yeah.
You can hear it, and it's slightly irritating, or you lose your concentration. If you're a member of The Who, you're certainly not aware of that at all, I don't know. So, and also, I mean, Zak Starkey being fired from The Who in 2025, how long a gig could he look forward to? How far ahead were they booking shows? I can't believe it was terribly far. He'll probably be back, don't you think?
I think so, and I think he's probably had the he's had the good bit, hasn't he?
Yes, he's had the good years. Yes, yeah. So this week we talked to, among others, we talked to the great Derek Shulman. Who, well, he is a name probably not known to most people, although you will be familiar with him through things like Simon Dupree and the Big Sounds, big hit from 1967, Kites, or from Gentle Giant, or from his subsequent career as a very successful record executive in the United States, responsible for signing the likes of Slipknot. Was it, Mark? Who else?
Yeah, Slipknot, I think it was. He signed Bon Jovi, he signed Nickelback. He kind of resurrected the careers of AC/DC and Bad Company. A really incredibly successful bloke.
Yeah, very
lovely fellow. Really interesting to talk to.
Very
but we were fixated, weren't we, about one particular period?
Well, the 1960s, the 1967. It always struck me because I remember, I'm old enough to remember Simon Dupree and the Big Sound as a band who were known as being very good players. I'll tell you what, they were always doing sessions on, pre-Radio 1 on the Light program, probably. And bands who got booked for sessions in the mid to late 60s were the kind of bands who could be relied upon to turn out 5 songs in a 3-hour session, or what it was, all of which were broadcastable, and some of them might be cover versions. First time I actually heard Yes, interesting bit of a tangent here, was they used to appear on Radio 1 sessions, doing things like Something's Coming from West Side Story, or Paul Simon's America, or all these kind of things. They were just good at mastering things. Anyway, so were Simon Dupree and the Big Sound. Excuse me. But they had no hits until somebody came along and said, here's a song called Kites. And it's a bit zany. It's a bit, here's a new thing, psychedelic, Why don't you change the way you dress rather, And so they instantly had a top 10 hit, didn't they? And it just struck me that the 1967 is a unique year in the history of popular music, not just got all that old malarkey about psychedelia and long instrumentals or whatever. It's all to do, once again, Mark, it's all to do with facial hair. It's entirely to do with facial hair.
Facial hair and shirts, but facial hair.
Because basically, in the year 1967, everybody got a mustache. And I've been doing a little bit of research about this, Mark, and the story goes that the Beatles played their final show at Candlestick Park in 1966 summer, was it? I think it was.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And then they came back and said, right, George Harrison said, I don't have to be a Beatle anymore. And they all went off on holiday. And then they reconvened in Abbey Road in late 1966 and started recording Strawberry Fields Forever. And they all turned up with mustaches, which I think is the most spooky kind of thing you possibly imagine.
You wonder if they all knew that each other was growing a moustache.
They could hear it. They could hear them. They were in Virginia Water, and they could hear this steady bristle.
What's John been up to? Not much. He's just desperately trying to grow a moustache.
But anyway, if you look at, it's quite interesting. You do some reading about this. Apparently, Paul originally grew his as a result of, he fell off a scooter. You'll know about this, Mark.
Yeah, he cracked his, I interviewed him about it. He cracked his tooth falling off a little moped, actually.
Yeah, in Liverpool.
And, it was the day before they recorded Rain and Paperback Writer.
Oh, right. Okay, so when was that?
In Chiswick House grounds.
So when was that?
God, no. Was that? God. It was 65, actually.
Yeah, no, I can't. Oh, whatever. Oh, he may have drained it once and then grown it again. The story I just read was that he fell off some vehicle in Liverpool in late 66 with Tara Brown.
Oh, right.
The legendary Tara Brown who blew his mind out in the car and all that stuff. And so he grew the moustache to kind of disguise. He must have had a cut on his lip or something like that. So he was the first one. But going back further, I find that if you look at the Rolling Stones video for Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadows, which you probably know, it was Peter Whitehead, who was a kind of proper movie director. And it's a combination of them tooling around backstage and dressing up in drag in New York and appearing in the Albert Hall. Both Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts have moustaches, and that's shot in 1966.
So then they
shaved them off. And do you know who else grew one in 1966? Ray Davis. Ray Davis grew one in 1966, and then again shaved it off. So there were straws in the wind, for the great mustache. The great mustache craze of 1967.
But it's just such an extraordinary time that I was trying to work out what the first, I suppose, officially psychedelic record was, because I suppose it was Revolver, really. But in fact, that 13th Floor Elevators released a record in October 66, which was actually called The Psychedelic Sounds of the 13th Floor Elevators. And then he had Surrealistic Pillow in April 67. And then he had Arnold Lane, and then he had See Emily Play, Sgt. Pepper, obviously, in May. And then, we were talking to Derek about this, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And suddenly you got Let's Get to San Francisco, Flowers in the Rain, Hole in My Shoe, Itchy Coo Park, all came out the same week. So the whole world had shifted. And we were just asking him, weren't we, about what happened? Were they all packed off to, to take six or whatever with a load of cash? Yeah, that's right. Told to come back with floral shirts and necklaces. Pretty much yes is the answer.
Yes,
because everybody. Was there a single kind of pop movement that had that amount of universal effect? Everybody, even Cliff Richard would sort of appear with kind of frilly, blousy type shirts. And
there's a challenge for the massive. There must have been in the long and varied career of Cliff Richard as much as a week, as little as a week, where he grew a mustache. It must have happened.
Yeah.
It has to have happened. And we want to know. We want to have it confirmed, But yeah, you're absolutely right. But you come back to the same thing. Things move really quickly then. And it was like the twist. It was like a dance craze. Everybody made a Twist record. Everybody made a San Francisco record.
Yeah.
It was only like 3 or 4 years later or something.
Yeah.
And of course it subsequently gets written about as if it's a massive cultural awakening. Well, maybe it was for some people, but it was a mad craze for loads of other people, wasn't it?
For others, it was just, let's grow a moustache and put on a paisley pattern shirt.
And let's go and borrow a mini moke.
Mini moke.
Do you remember mini moke?
Collarless jacket. That's right, yes.
Yeah. I was walking in the West End the other day, and I walked down, is it St. James Street? I think it is, just off Piccadilly. And you go past what used to be the Economist building. I don't think it is any longer. The magazine, The Economist, the business magazine. And I think it used to be called Economist Plaza. And I think I'm right in saying that in nearly every film in the 60s, from 66, 67, there is always some scene, some kind of weird psychedelic dream sequence where, two characters are walking in the dawn's early light somewhere in London, and they come upon a load of beautiful people who are coming home from some mad rave. Somebody's got a feather boa. Somebody's holding
acoustic guitar.
World's biggest balloon. And
somebody's probably got a lighted candle.
Somebody's driving a mini moped.
Someone's got some finger cymbals. A tambourine.
Well, one of these sequences is in the movie Blow Up, which is the kind of classic swing in London film, and that's shot around Economist Plaza, just off St James Street. It? Yes, absolutely. So this is the kind of vital information that that the word podcast deals in, and I hope you appreciate it. So what's this business about Neil Tennant and Mark Springer? You were saying?
Oh, well, I thought it was just interesting. Neil was in Folkestone the other day because he's got a house quite nearby, and he was in Folkestone looking in various shop windows and saw a copy of Smash Hits. I think it was in a record shop, actually. And he went in and he opened up the Smash Hits, and it was from, I think, 1982, and by complete coincidence, it was one where he'd done the singles. And his single of the week was by the group he described as being the art, pop and jazz band Rip, Rig and Panic. And he mentioned that he really liked the B-side too, which was a solo piano piece by Mark Springer. And he'd looked at Spotify to see if it was still available to stream, and it was, and he decided he was going to buy the CD. And in buying the CD, I guess he must have got it from Mark Springer or whatever. He had to put in his email address, and he got an email back from Mark Springer saying, "Are you the Neil Tennant? I've been trying to get in touch with you. Would you be at all interested in doing a collaboration?" And, a few emails exchanged, and sure enough, Neil has done. He has done the collaboration, but this is a classical music album played by Mark Springer with him doing the lyrics. I just thought it was just one of those lovely little things where just these beautiful moments where things suddenly just a little spark appears, and also tells you once again, and we have said this many times, about the ecumenical character of Smash Hits.
Absolutely.
Think about it, Smash Hits, 1982. Everyone thought it was just Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet.
No, it wasn't. Everything
it was writing about, obscure John Peel show acts.
There is probably a piece about Stockhausen.
There's probably one about Stockhausen. Would be writing about. It was one of the very first magazines to really get onto hip hop and the new electronic dance music. It was writing about soul. It was writing about. It used to have big pieces about the story of the Beatles, the story of David Bowie. There was absolutely nothing. There was jazz in there, all sorts of stuff. And the idea that in 1982, Smash Hits single of the week was by Rip, Rig and Panic, who were a Notting Hill gang from near here. Actually, Nana Cherry was the singer, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Cass Sager, and they were really, they made some great records, actually. One called Go, I think it was. And there's this bizarre kind of avant jazz band. And that Neil not only makes that a single a fortnight, but then goes on about how brilliant the solo
the
piano B-side is. I mean, that is pretty amazing, isn't it?
But it's also the strange serendipitous route that popular music follows, isn't it? So what are we talking about? Nearly 45 years later, the person who wrote it is reacquainted with it by seeing it in a shop window in Folkestone.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing. Not the internet or whatever. That's just him seeing it and going, oh, God, yeah, that takes me back.
That issue. Yeah.
And
that idle moment, he flicks through, and then suddenly this connection happens. I love things like that.
Yeah, I suppose the internet is what further facilitates him pursuing the interest that's been piqued, isn't it? Whereas you wouldn't have been able to do that in the past. But no, it's kind of heartwarming. That is.
It is.
Absolutely extraordinary.
You're listening to Word in Your Ear, because when you're tired of the Beatles, you're tired of life.
We should just mention, 1-to-1, the extraordinary John and Yoko documentary made by Kevin MacDonald, which we both saw a few weeks ago. It's an extraordinary reminder of just that whole world, because it's about what is it, the first year or so that John and Yoko spent in the United States, isn't it? So it's
they're living in Greenwich Village.
71, 72, isn't it, really?
72 is the shows at Madison Square Garden. His only full concert, wasn't it, after the Beatles?
Yeah, which is what kind of underpins the film. And it's before... There's kind of two phases to John and Yoko's life in New York. Well, at least two phases. One is the early bit where they live in Greenwich Village and they hang out with the radicals and the hipsters. And the other bit is where they go to the Dakota building and hang out with the multimillionaires, don't they? It's a very, very different kind of life. But this is definitely about the first.
And that footage of them in the Greenwich Village flat is really interesting, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I love that footage where you just see what life was like, what furniture was like. There's always overflowing ashtrays, there's vinyl records, funny old kettles, kitchen equipment, the things that the carpets, the curtains, things that really date it and really bring it back, I thought that was interesting because they'd gone from Tittenhurst Park, living in this massive acreage with its own lake, to this little tiny apartment, which they really, really liked. But the thing is full of so many parallels with life today, I think. So many similarities with Trump. There's Nixon. It's all the backdrop is Nixon seeking re-election, isn't it? Governor George Wallace has been shot. There's the Vietnam demonstrations, the suppression of student protests going on, which is very similar actually to what's going on now, and immense aggression against the gay community. And there's the deportation of undesirable foreigners, one of them, of course, being Lennon, wasn't it, who was threatened with deportation. And so there's a lot of, and also the stuff about the scrutiny, the surveillance of their phones being tapped and all that. What a terrible life, But I looked at it and I thought he was just in recovery after the Beatles. He couldn't function on his own. He only could function as John and Yoko, and they talk about themselves the whole time as John and Yoko. He never goes anywhere without her. He never says anything without her. Her backing him up. They're inseparable, aren't they? I thought that was interesting.
In a bizarre way, actually. Because if anybody you knew walked about like that or socially interacted like that, you'd think that's weird. If it was a friend or a neighbor or whatever, or somebody you work with who was literally never seen without the other person, and they became Fred and Jane with an ampersand. You never got them. You never got them individually. You never did. You'd think that was strange.
And no one is giving him any kind of real valuable advice because they're so in awe of the fact that he's John Lennon. Because what I was struck by also was the extraordinary naivety that he's got this celebrity and he's got this desire to promote, world peace, etc. And he does it by deciding he's going to do the Free the People tour. Do you remember that?
Oh, God.
And the whole idea is they're going to raise money. And he says, we're going to give this money to the first 500 people in certain jails. They're going to pick a jail. And alphabetically, they're going to go through the list, give the first 500 people some money, which will give them bail so they can get out for a while. That is his idea. And in this clip, he's with Alan Klein, who at that point is managing him. And you think, Alan Klein, unbelievably useless. At no point does Alan Klein say, now, look, let's just work out precisely what you do. And John Lennon says, I'll be like Jesse James. I'll be like Robin Hood. Do you remember that bit? And Klein should be saying that, just hang on, let's just work out some practical reality here.
But do you think it's also the fact that, it's quite interesting, because Alan Klein, nobody more hard-headed than Alan Klein, nobody less likely to want to, ally himself with springing people from jail and so forth. And yet his conduct in those conversations bears out the ancient truth that successful rock managers never tell the client he's wrong, ever. They just hope that they'll go off the idea. You know what I mean? Naturally. Yeah. Because if you...
They don't want to be seen to be crossing swords with them because it might threaten their position.
It slows progress on other fronts or whatever, Just let them indulge themselves with whatever.
Yeah, hopefully it'll run out of steam.
It'll run out of steam, as this one did, didn't it?
It did.
They couldn't make it work. But it also a reminder of a kind of vanished age of media that... it's really interesting that Kevin MacDonald was able to put this thing together. It's very, very good. because they've got the concert, and the concert's really good.
It is.
And they've got phone conversations, recordings of, them talking to absolutely everybody. But also, they're on just about every chat show that moves, aren't they? He's just available. And they were, as famous as anybody in the world, and prepared to go on any chat show you'd care to name, most of which were live, and say the first thing that came into their heads.
Yeah.
And you look at it, you think, my God, it's kind of liberating to hear somebody say these kind of things. Nobody, and you look at the landscape nowadays,
no preparation.
Even with the media silos that we've got nowadays, there's no sense that somebody's going to walk on a big live TV show, which is going to be watched by, 40 million people, and drop a bomb of some kind in terms of saying something that's never been said before.
Yeah, because it's all worked out reverse now. So what do we want from this appearance of this chat show? This is the point we're going to make. So let's work back from that to see how we can make sure we make that point.
No, but there was no pre-interview in the days of John Lennon. He just went on Dick Cavett or whatever and said whatever he was going to say.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a really good film, and if you want to see it, you can see it at the cinema on a big screen.
This is Word in Your Ear, down the rock and roll rabbit hole since 2007.
Well, that's just about all for this week, but we ought to plug, apart from the Derek Shulman podcast, which will be up soon, we're going to plug Daryl Hall, who we talked to the other day, who is terrific value, really interesting, really funny. There he was in his house in the Bahamas.
Absolutely.
Straw hat, you could hear the roosters crowing in his little farmyard outside.
Did he say his house was an 1800 house?
Yeah, I think it was.
1800. He likes an old property, does Darryl
Yeah, he
Hall.
restores old buildings.
He's big on restoring old buildings. That's what he spent his money on, I imagine. So that's there. That's very good. And if you're thinking, as I know you are, how can I possibly support this work? By lending more than my ears, you could decide to become a Patreon supporter, details of which are available if you go to 3wspatreon.com/word in your ear and find out how you might get involved. And if you get involved at the right level, you might be joining us on the occasion of your birthday to throw a personal log on the Word in Your Ear fire.
And now it's time for Word in Your Ear's birthday guest of the week.
So we're joined by Al Harton. Is it your birthday today, Al, or has it been, or is it?
No, it was a considerable few days ago, actually.
Right.
We've had a bit of trouble trying to arrange this.
Well, here we are. And the tradition is, as you'll no doubt be aware, that you have a log to throw on the Word in Your Ear fire. I believe it's an aeronautical one.
It is, yes. I was impressed with Paul Monaghan's input around about in February, a few weeks ago, where he talked about architects who.
Oh right, yes, it became
were musicians.
Yeah, all the way around.
Yeah, exactly. And that got me to thinking. I thought, there's a Venn diagram between architects and music, professional music or performing music, but there's also a Venn diagram between aviation and music.
And is that a particular interest of yours?
Well, I've kind of, I can't really say a foot in both camps. I've got a body in both camps.
Right. Have you got a pilot's license?
I do, yes.
Right.
I've had one since I was 21, which was a long time ago.
And what do you do with that?
What do you do with
just take off and go to France for lunch?
No. I wish it was like that. No, when my professional music career came to kind of a crossroads, I took a couple of years out and developed a professional license. So I actually hold the airline transport pilot's license and work for a major airline whose name I cannot mention on a part-time basis. So I was full-time for many years, but I'm part-time now, which is great.
Do you have to refresh it to keep it? Do you have to keep it? You go do your test kind of thing.
You've got to go into the simulator, which is a lurching cave of doom, basically, as we see it, You've got to do that every 6 months. You've got to do 2 4-hour sessions and
2 4 hours. Wow. God.
Yeah, put yourself through a lot of pain and but a lot of training as well. A lot of refreshing of techniques and procedures and things.
Right. So you were going to tell us. I mean, there are obvious rock stars who we associate with flying. I suppose the most obvious one is Bruce Dickinson. Is that the most obvious one?
Well, Gary Newman as well again.
Yeah, Gary Newman, Bruce Dickinson. Bruce is a friend of mine. I met him years ago, and I MD'd some musical stuff for him, some parties that we did, put bands together for that. He's probably at the pinnacle of famous musicians who have achieved the aviation world because he
used to fly Iron Maiden out on world tours in their own private aircraft, didn't he? He piloted.
He did, yes. Yeah,
really impressive.
Very, very much so. And he, on his own merits, he achieved command. He became a captain with an airline called Astraeus quite a few years back. They don't exist anymore. But he got that totally on his own merit. It was, they were happy to have a rock star as part of their employee pool, shall we say. But he still got there by himself. He's a very talented guy, very talented pilot as well, with vast experience.
What makes a talented pilot? Because we as a passenger, we rather like to think we don't notice it.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's a good question. And, when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, what are the crossover skills between? What are the skill sets that both apply to music at a certain level? Because anybody can pick up a guitar and strum a few chords. Anybody can go for a flying lesson, maybe get himself solo. But what are the skill sets that it takes to get you to a performing level, a professional performing level of music, or to be able to hold down a pilot's license? And that's any license in a sense, from the PPL right up to the ATPL, right up to airline command. So you've got hard skills, obviously. The hard skills of both flying and music are stuff that takes practice. It takes left brain activity. It takes a lot of learning. You have to put the hours in. You've basically got to dedicate yourself to everything. You've got to be able to memorize and remember a lot of stuff. In music, you've got to be able to memorize scales, harmony, turnarounds, everything else. In flying, procedures, the actual physical skills of it as well. That's a kind of a hard skill crossover. There's hand-eye coordination. But also there's a one big corollary between the two that a lot of people won't realise, which is they're both fundamentally right brain activities. Because when you're playing music, you're making the world sound right based upon what's going on around you. So you've got to have this situational awareness of what everybody else in the band's doing, where the music's going, what you're doing is interacting with the rest of the band. And it's the same in flying. You're looking outside the window. It's a horrible, gusty day. You don't have time to look in and check every single speed. Where am I 1 knot fast? Am I 1 knot slow? No. Make the world look right. And that's what you're doing is you're looking outside the window. You're making sure that the perception that you have meets what it should be doing. That's why you do your best landings in the worst weather, because you're too busy actually using the right side of your brain to make the world look right. And you don't have time to analyze.
So who are the unexpected? Who are the ones we wouldn't know? The rock musicians who fly.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I got a wee list.
Go on.
There's the professionals. We obviously get Gary Newman, display pilot. Bruce Dickinson, obviously airline captain. Steve Morse of Deep Purple. He was a first officer for a couple of years with a regional carrier in America. John Travolta holds a professional license.
Of course,
yes.
Of course.
Chris Christopherson is one that leapt out from the professional side of things. He was a military helicopter pilot.
Because he did, absolutely. And didn't he land on Johnny Cash's lawn?
Yeah,
there's some no doubt apocryphal story.
I think it might be apocryphal, but all that. But on the rest of my list, and this is where the Venn diagrams with what you call Paul Monahan's architects. Right. There are 3 architects that I found. Roger Waters, he also holds a pilot's license.
Oh,
Nick Mason. And on the Learning
Yes.
to Fly song, he's the one that's reciting the checklist for some kind of single engine warrior or something like that. And John Denver as well. He was an architect.
What about Dave Gilmour? Because I remember reading an interview with Dave Gilmour where he talked about flying, and he was talking about, which I thought was very attractive, that idea of literally taking off, going to France for lunch, going back to see some friends in Ireland for tea, coming home for supper. I thought, that does sound attractive.
It's lovely. I mean, there is that element as well. You know, the again linking the two together. You know, successful musicians make a bit of money. You know, those of us that fool about down in the lower ends of the spectrum don't make that much money at it, but we still do it.
But they'll be
professionally.
They'll be able to claim it against tax, won't they?
Yeah.
Seriously, they will, because it's transport, isn't it?
Yeah.
Taking you to work with other musicians or whatever.
Dave and I used to work with Nick Mason's daughter, Chloe Mason, who used to fly helicopters. Do you remember that, Dave?
Yes.
I remember her coming back after one. This is 30 years
she
ago.
flew planes. Did she fly helicopters?
Yeah, helicopters. No, maybe planes as well.
No, it's planes,
I remember her
definitely.
talking about... I don't think the equipment was quite so sophisticated 30 years ago. And she said she got lost once. And she drove to the coast and then just started going up the coast until she recognised the coast from a kind of school map, really. And thought, oh, right, now I know where. That's Holy Island. Just hang on, I've got to turn around and go back to London. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I know, just to carry on with the question you asked earlier, what is the skills that make a good pilot and a good musician? When you think about how you MD a band and how you command an airliner, there are a vast number of similarities, because you're working with a team. You're leading a team. You've got to keep that team together. You've got to deal with issues, personnel issues as they arise. You can make sure the job gets done for a start in the most efficient way possible. And a good MD will let the musicians within his band grow and develop. And a good captain will let the rest of the crew, the co-pilot, everybody else in there, give them the space to develop. It's a vast intersection between the two.
Now, I tell you the strangest... Sorry, I read a biography of Ray Charles years ago. And there used to be all kinds of jokes about Ray Charles, obviously being blind, and
I don't think he held a pilot's license.
But no, he didn't hold a pilot's license. But he and his band always travelled by their own plane, always doing one nights around the States. And apparently, when he flew overnight, it was not uncommon for Ray to be on the flight deck, holding the stick or whatever. A certain amount of it you can do by hearing. I don't know. Maybe in those days, I don't know. They used to say, "Ray's at the controls." We'll
fasten your seatbelts.
It must be a marvellous thing, though, if you're, because there are charities that take people up who have disabilities, and it must be fabulous to experience all that extra sensory input that you wouldn't normally get in your life, and that you get on board an aircraft.
No, okay, well, thanks very much for that. You've given us something to think about. Although I'm a bit worried about John Denver. Didn't John Denver perish in an air crash?
Yes, yeah, he literally just bought it. It was a rather strange thing, if I remember rightly, called a long easy, which is a kind of a weird thing where the wings are behind you, and and I think he'd only get a few hours in it.
So he bought a dodgy plane. It can happen to all.
You should have got it second hand. That's unkind.
Well, Al,
very
thanks
nice
for
to talk
that.
to you.
I know your birthday was a little while ago, but as far as we're concerned, it's still going on.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.